At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aurum. Let's begin. The Marine on Teal Cho's deck plate gasped around a hole in his chest. Plasma cooked a clean, cauterized hole through his armor, but the overpressure pulped his lung. Every ragged breath was a wet, desperate gulp. Her hands moved with practiced speed, finding the wound, pressing a patch over the entry point. The patch's chemical sealant hissed, bonding with the man's skin. The air, thick with the plastic fume of vaporized insulation and the hot, coppery scent of blood, coated her tongue.
"Just breathe, Corporal. Breathe slowly,"
Teal said, her voice a low, steady counterpoint to the wail of alarms.
"I've got you."
A deep, structural groan tore through the CNS Resolve's deck plates, a shudder of failing metal. The deck heaved violently, throwing Teal from her patient. She slammed into a row of vacant crash couches, her helmet smacking against the stanchion with a sharp ceramic crack. For a moment, she registered only a piercing tone and a radiating ache behind her eyes. Emergency floods activated, casting the compartment in a stark crimson light. Primary power failed. The life support system's low thrum died, and the hiss of escaping air took its place. Sergeant Emmerich Gage emerged from the smoke-choked corridor, planting his feet wide. He hauled Teal up, his grip a vice. A wide grin stretched his face, showing every tooth. "Up you get, Joe. The fun's just beginning." Pike was already up, his heavy plasma cannon held at a low ready. Corporal Sully stood at Gage's shoulder, focusing her chrome eye. A neutered, automated voice announced into the quiet.
"Warning. Catastrophic structural failure detected. All hands abandon ship. Repeat. All hands..."
Gage slapped a panel on his gauntlet, silencing the announcement. He looked at his squad, the three of them standing in the warship's ruin. "Scrap 9!" he bellowed, his voice a thunderclap against the ship's final groans. Teal looked up sharply. She stared at him, the word lodged in her throat.
"Sergeant?"
"You heard me." Pike let out a whoop, a raw, exhilarated sound. "Whoa! At last!" He grabbed extra power cells from a nearby locker, stuffing them into his webbing. Sully was already at a secondary comms panel. She tapped 3 keys, then pressed her thumb to a scanner. Scrolling red code filled the screen.
"Forcing the launch cycle,"
she said.
"Bypassing fleet command."
Teal stepped toward Gage, a tight pressure in her chest.
"Sir, Scrap 9 is a ghost story. A joke they tell recruits."
The maneuver was a legend, a suicide run forbidden by standing orders. "The best jokes have a grain of truth, Corporal," Gage said. His scarred hand rested on her shoulder. His gaze was steady. "Protocol gets you a week in a sealed can, waiting for a pickup that rarely materializes. This," he squeezed her shoulder, the pressure a grounding certainty, "gets us back in the action." Out there, the fleet fought and died for the Rime Verge jump gate. Protocol meant waiting while their friends burned. The ship gave another wrenching lurch. A hairline crack fractured across the forward viewport. The vacuum a silent threat just beyond the stressed polyarmor. Teal looked back at the wounded Marine. His chest was still. His eyes were wide, staring at the dying lights of a ship that failed him. A cold pressure formed in her gut. She had tried to save him. Now Gage asked her to do something else entirely. She gave a single, sharp nod.
"Right. The fight."
"That's the spirit," Gage boomed. "Let's go break something expensive." They piled into Lifeboat 5, a cramped, utilitarian box designed for one thing: survival. Sully slammed her palm heel against the terminal she jacked into.
Overrides are in, we are green for lunch.
As the magnetic clamps released, Teal looked through the thick viewport. The CNS Resolve was breaking apart. The destroyer's main structural spar, the spine that held it together for 50 years of service, buckled under the Vesper Guild's relentless plasma assault. The hull tore open, venting atmosphere and bodies into the void in a searing flash. Their home vanished. The pod shot away. A metal shell spat into the cosmos. The recyclers' hum and their own ragged breathing filled the pod. The little craft tumbled end over end, a piece of shrapnel from a much larger explosion. Through the viewport, Commonwealth frigates and Guild cruisers wheeled around each other, leaving plasma and kinetic trails like incandescent threads. Other lifeboats from the Resolve appeared, their emergency beacons activating one by one. Gage pointed at their own navigation console. A small icon blinked insistently. "Sully, kill the beacon." Sully's hands moved swiftly across the console. The beacon winked out. Teal glanced at the emergency protocol display next to the hatch. Amber text glowed.
The escape pod protocol says await rescue,
she said. The real work began. Sully jacked back into the pod's control system, rerouting auxiliary power from the beacon to the nav computer and killing the safeties one by one.
Rerouting primary power from life support reserves to the entry thrusters,
she announced.
Structural integrity is now a theoretical concept.
The pod emitted a low, protesting groan, a vibration Teal felt in her jaw. Pike unslung his cannon. He used a magnetic driver to bolt its mounting bracket directly to the pod's floor. The heavy weapon now pointed forward like a crude, oversized hood ornament. Teal secured her medkit. She brushed her fingers over the hypercoagulant gel canister and the decontaminant spray. Her xenotox instructor called the combination a recipe for unscheduled chemical disassembly during a lecture. She focused on her task. In a scrap 9, the whole pod was disposable. Work awaited her. Gage grunted as he adjusted the bulky exo-assist brace on his left leg. Blue sparks showered from a frayed power cable near the knee joint. He cursed under his breath and slapped polymer sealant tape over it. He called it his periodontal problem, deep-rooted and painful to fix.
Target acquired,
Sully said.
Vesper Guild carrier, the Ledger. She's the mother hen for this whole damn flock.
The ship appeared on the main viewer, a jagged, apostrophe-shaped silhouette against the starfield, bristling with weapon emplacements and antenna arrays. "All right, kids," Gage said. "Time to go loud. Sully, light it up." Sully's thumb hovered over the main console.
This will hurt.
"Pain builds character," Pike quipped.
Then we're about to get real interesting,
Sully muttered and hit the switch. Crushing force slammed into them. The pod's emergency atmospheric entry thrusters, designed only for short bursts, ignited in a continuous high-G burn. Teal's organs shifted, her vision tunneling into a gray pinprick. The acceleration crushed her, pressing them deep into their couches. The pod leaped forward. The Ledger grew, swelling from a distant threat into their entire universe. On the Ledger's bridge, Factor Orso observed the battlespace holotank, a roiling light and shadow cloud projected over a coolant pit. The Commonwealth destroyer's destruction proceeded as projected. The battle display shifted around him. His form was a column of corded, leathery flesh, anchored to the deck by two powerful hydrostatic limbs that coiled like pythons. A third, more slender limb hovered over the display, its tip dilating as it sampled atmospheric data from the projection. His form lacked a head. Instead, the entire upper third of his body pivoted to face a minor discrepancy in the data. His collar-mounted translator rendered his voice, a series of low, resonant pressure waves, into flat syntax. Report. A junior officer, another Vesperite, answered from its own station. Its manipulative limb tensed, the skin rippling. Factor, we have an anomaly. Contact 69er Delta, a Terran lifeboat. Its emergency beacon is dark. Orso focused. In the holotank, a single icon detached from the lifeboat cloud and accelerated toward them. Vector. Directly at us, Factor. Hangar Bay 4. Orso analyzed the data. The energy signature diverged from all missile profiles. The velocity was far too high for a standard docking procedure. The display painted its trajectory as a sharp red line. A boarding attempt via escape pod was a maneuver with a perfect record of failure, pointlessly expending trained personnel. Terrans, however, had a documented history of expending personnel on such ventures. What are the intercept odds for point defense? Orso asked. Low, Factor. The contact's acceleration profile is erratic. Firing would expend more in munitions than the pod is worth. Orso considered the variables. A direct impact on the outer hangar door was acceptable. Armor plated the doors against micrometeorites and stray weapons fire. Repairing cosmetic damage would cost less than firing a low-probability intercept volley. The most resource-sparing solution was to let them hit. He uncoiled an anchor limb from the deck, the appendage flowing like thick fluid as he gestured toward the ship's internal schematic. Seal Hangar 4 from all adjacent sectors, ventral, dorsal, and aft bulkheads. Full lockdown. Redirect Primary Security Team Alpha to the interior entrance. Asset control Squad Gamma in the Armored Observation Control Room. Let the asset contain itself. He issued a final directive. Activate Hangar 4's automated fire suppression system, triggered by hull breach. The junior officer processed the order. We are allowing them to impact the hull? Correct, Orso's translator stated. The asset has chosen its own container. It is best to utilize it. He turned his attention back to the broader battle. The Terran anomaly was a distraction, a single irrational data point in a predictable engagement. He would deal with it efficiently. The carrier became a gray, pockmarked metal universe that blotted out the stars. Gage roared through the comms. Brace! Teal folded her arms over her chest and shut her eyes tight. The pod's nose crumpled with a shriek as polyalloy tore. Consoles exploded, spitting sparks. The deck plates buckled, rising up to meet them. Her crash couch broke from its moorings, and the force threw her against her restraints, her world a disorienting series of impacts. She came to in painful waves, a high-frequency tone pulsing in her skull. The air was thick with the acrid, burnt electronics smell. She blinked, and the compartment swam into focus. The mangled wreck of the pod had embedded itself halfway into the carrier's outer hangar door. A fine crack network radiated across the viewport, and through them she could see the cold stars. Air hissed out through a dozen new hole seams. Status? She croaked, the words scraping her throat. A dull groan came from across the crumpled compartment. Pike. Ribs are suboptimal. Cannon's fine, though. Sully hung limp in her harness, head lolling to one side. Teal pushed through the pain, her mind cycling through triage steps. She unbuckled herself, her limbs responding with a sluggish delay. She stumbled over to Sully and checked her pulse. Strong, but thready. Sully's chrome eye was dark. Concussion. Gage was already pulling himself up, his jaw set. He put weight on his left leg. The exobrace erupted in a final, brilliant, sparking flash and died. His leg buckled under him. He cursed, a low growl, catching himself on a twisted bulkhead strut. He crawled to the emergency hatch, grabbed the manual release lever, and threw his weight against it. With a metal screech, the hatch blew outward. Thick white foam jets erupted from nozzles around the breach, hissing as they sprayed the mangled pod.
Suppression system!
Sully yelled, already moving.
Pike, emitters!
Pike shouldered his cannon and fired a burst that vaporized the nearest nozzle. Sully darted to a panel beside the breach and slammed an armored fist into its emergency cutout, silencing the automated defense. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space. Dim, yellow utility lights cast long, distorted shadows across the hangar deck. The air was cold, still, and carried the suppression foam's chemical bite and the hum of active energy fields. Dozens of hastily erected energy cages lined the walls, their shimmering containment fields casting a sickly glow. Inside, figures huddled together. Commonwealth sailors in torn, stained uniforms. Lanky, winged Karchers, their fine feathers matted and dull. A hulking Jordian, whose layered hide resembled petrified wood in a freighter crewman's coveralls. These were the crews of ships the Guild destroyed or captured. Hostages. Assets. They stared back at the three humans interrupting their captivity, their expressions a mix of shock and dawning hope. Gage looked across the scene, his jaw tightening. "Well," he said, "looks like the Guild kept busy." Teal's mind catalogued wounds before people. The Jordian had a makeshift bandage on its craggy forearm. A Karcher favored a leg, its delicate bone structure likely fractured. The humans looked malnourished, their faces smudged with grime and exhaustion. She turned back to her own squad. She ran a diagnostic on Sully, a moderate concussion, but her pupils reacted evenly to light. She administered a mild stimulant. Pike had definitely broken some ribs. She gave him a broad-spectrum painkiller shot.
Laughing will hurt,
she advised.
I'll try to behave, Doc.
Then she turned to Gage. She knelt by his leg. The exobrace was a wreck of mangled composite and scorched wiring. The plasma bolt he took back on the Resolve weakened it. The crash finished it. His actual leg underneath was a mess of scarred tissue and metal pins from old surgeries. The brace was more than an assist. It held him together. Now, the device was dead weight. "It's finished," he grunted. He stared outward, scanning the gantries and cargo containers that littered the hangar floor. "Mission's the same. Hangar controls are across the bay. We get to them, we open the doors for the fleet."
And them?
Teal asked, nodding toward the prisoner pens. They complicated everything. A liability, but still people. A lanky Karcher, its feathers a dusty gray instead of a healthy specimen's vibrant blue, called out from a nearby cage. A translator disc pinned to its chest rendered its melodic chirps into halting standard.
"You are Commonwealth? You are here for rescue?"
Gage opened his mouth, but a sudden white glare flooded the hangar. Spotlights from the upper gantry snapped on, pinning the four of them in their cones between the pod's wreckage and a watching crowd. An amplified voice echoed through the vast space, a Vesperite translator's flat, synthesized output. "Human aggressors, you have entered a restricted commercial zone. Cease this futile resistance. Surrender and we will process you as assets." Orso's synthesized tone was like a butcher explaining a slaughterhouse's economics. Vesperite security teams materialized on the gantries above. They moved with a fluid, boneless speed. They held plasma rifles at low ready. Instead, they took up overwatch positions, rifles covering every cage on the assets. Orso spoke again, as dispassionate as a stock market ticker. Any hostile action will result in immediate asset depreciation. This is your only warning. Gage's string of curses was creative, even for him. He's using them as shields. The whole damn hangar is a human shield. From the bridge, Orso watched the holotank. The Terrans took cover behind their wrecked pod. By threatening the prisoners, he restricted their tactical options. Their compassion was a vulnerability he could exploit. Down on the deck, Gage assessed their new reality. Enemy fire pinned them down. Forward was 300 meters of open deck, a death sentence. Sully, stirring back to full awareness, crawled over to them and pressed a hand to her temple.
They've sealed the interior hangar door,
she rasped as she blinked and her chrome eye rebooted.
Mag-locked and shielded. They've trapped us.
We need a distraction, Gage muttered, scanning the hangar's architecture. A big one. He looked up, his gaze settling on a series of thick, heavily insulated pipes running along the ceiling, beaded with condensation. Coolant lines. If we rupture those, he said, a grin spreading across his face, all teeth. We flood the bay with cryogenic fog. It'll block all vision and thermal sensors.
Cryogas would flash freeze exposed skin on contact,
Teal pointed out. Which is why it's a great distraction, Gage countered. He looked at Sully. How are you with improvised plumbing? Sully narrowed her good eye.
I can breach a pipe, but the charges I have left are demolition grade. A controlled breach is unlikely. It'll be messy.
Even better, Gage said. The plan was insane. Classic Gage.
We have another problem,
Sully said, shaking her head.
I designed my charges for shape detonation against hardened targets. That pipe is relatively soft. A clean rupture is unlikely. I might just punch a hole in it, or the blast could be too wide and damage the ceiling struts.
Teal listened. An uncontrolled variable, an imprecise tool. They needed something more focused. She glanced at her medkit. Reactive chemical agents. Catalysts.
I can do it,
she said. Gage turned to her, one eyebrow raised. Pike and Sully looked at her.
The hypercoagulant gel we use to seal major arterial wounds,
she explained.
Its base is a rapid polymerizing agent. The sterile field decontaminant spray is a powerful oxidizer. If I mix them...
You'll create a catalyst, Gage finished.
A violent exothermic reaction, Teal confirmed. It will dissolve a localized point on the pipe's alloy skin. A clean breach, like chemical surgery.
The three of them stared at the medkit. Teal looked down at her hands, the healer's hands. She was proposing to mix a cure and a cleanser to create a weapon. Gage saw her hesitation. He put a hand on her knee, his touch steady. Do it, Cho. She hesitated. Pike rested a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, Doc, stopping the bleeding requires a deeper cut. She nodded once. She would keep these people from dying in their cages. She opened her medkit. She tipped the decontaminant's fine blue mist into the hypercoagulant's thick, clear gel. They swirled in a spare sample container into a vicious, bile-colored fluid that radiated a faint heat. Sully stripped a magnetic clamp from one of her disabled charges and jury-rigged a simple delivery mechanism. A small, timed detonator would shatter the container, splashing the reactive agent onto the pipe. All right, Gage said. Here's the plan. Pike, you're on percussion. Light up the gantry opposite the pipe. Draw their attention. Sully, you run the package. Plant it. Teal and I will provide suppressing fire. On my mark, we move through the fog to the central cargo stacks. Go! They broke from cover. Mark! Gage roared. Pike's plasma cannon answered with a deafening bellow. A white-hot energy torrent slammed into the gantry across the bay, carving molten chunks from the metal walkway. Vesperite guards scrambled for protection, their return shots going wide. Under the distraction of that noise, Sully sprinted from the wreckage. She ran in a low crouch, a gray blur against the deck plates. She reached the pylon directly beneath the target pipe, her movements fluid. She leaped, her magnetic boots clinging to the metal support, and slapped the small charge onto the coolant line. She dropped back to the deck and sprinted back toward them. The charge went off with a quiet. For a second, the scene held. Then, a dark, spreading stain appeared on the pipe's surface, as if the metal itself were dissolving. With a sharp crack, the alloy gave way. A thick, roiling white gas cloud billowed out with a deep hiss. The cryogenic coolant, hitting the warmer hangar air, instantly sublimated into a dense fog. The temperature in the bay plummeted. New alarms blared. A synthesized voice announced through the space, overriding all others. Visuals obscured. Initiating atmospheric purge to restore control. Hangar Bay will achieve vacuum in 20 minutes. Go! Gage ordered. Move, move, move! They ran into the fog. Visibility vanished. The world became a white swirl, their own boots pounding the deck, and the Vesperites' wet, clicking shouts filled the air. Teal's helmet display switched to thermals, rendering the world in shifting blues and reds. They were halfway across the open floor, moving between the ghostly thermal cargo container signatures when a shape lunged from the fog, a Vesperite guard. The plasma bolt was a crimson streak. Teal saw it coming, but her reaction was a fraction too slow. Gage shoved her, hard. Teal tumbled to the deck as the bolt caught Gage square in his bad leg. The dead exobrace, already a wreck, exploded, spraying shrapnel and superheated composite. Gage went down, a scream tearing from his throat. She was already moving, her medkit open before she reached him. She and Pike grabbed Gage under the arms and dragged him behind the relative safety of a large cargo container. His leg was a ruin. The explosion shredded his fatigues in the flesh beneath. Brace shards embedded themselves in the muscle. Blood, black in the thermal overlay, pumped from a severed artery. She went to work. Apply pressure, find the artery, seal the wound. Gage shot his hand out and grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. He was pale, his face slick with sweat, but his eyes were clear. "No," he gasped, the words forced through clenched teeth. "Mission first. Get to the console." He looked past her, at Pike and Sully, who stood with their weapons raised, their aim shifting uselessly in the fog. "Chosen command," Gage gritted out. Command? She was a medic. She saved lives. She followed orders. Pike looked at her, his usual humor gone. "What's the order, Corporal?" Sully gave a sharp nod. They waited for her. The decision was hers. Her gaze swept from their faces to Gage, bleeding out on the deck, then out into the dissipating fog where enemies hunted them, and finally to the prisoners. Gage's plan was simple. Open the hangar doors, let the fleet handle the rest. But a broadside from a Commonwealth frigate would shred the hangar, killing everyone inside. A soldier's solution. A new plan formed in her mind, a medic's calculus. Save the patient. All of them. She looked at her squad.
Sully, get to that console, but keep the main doors sealed. Your new priority is to open the prisoner pens, all of them. Pike, you're with me. We're going to make a goddamn army.
In the observation control room, Orso watched his holotank turn to chaos. The cryogenic fog blinded his visual sensors. The atmospheric purge was underway, but the Terrans remained active. His primary goal was to secure the hangar and its assets. The current situation put those assets at risk. Their value depreciated. He recalculated. The purge was the ultimate expression of that logic. A complete write-off of damaged goods was preferable to allowing this chaos to spread. The purge announcement made the prisoners hammer on their energy shields. Orso changed the terms. He would sacrifice his own hostages to kill her squad. The cold logic of it was staggering.
Sully, how much time do you need?
Teal yelled into her comm. Sully's voice crackled back, strained.
Too much. He's locked me out of the environmental systems. I'm fighting him for control of the pens, but his firewalls are top tier.
They had to give her more time. Teal and Pike took up a defensive position around the console Sully feverishly worked on. The fog thinned. Vesperite teams, their willowy forms now equipped with emergency breathers over their featureless heads, advanced through the haze. Plasma bolts scored the metal around them, the air crackling with energy. Pike's cannon barked in reply, each shot carving a destructive swath. They gave ground, meter by meter, buying Sully seconds. 15 minutes to atmospheric evacuation. Sully cursed, slamming her fist against the console. A smoke plume erupted from her bypass tool.
He's countering me in real time!
Teal laid down suppressing fire, forcing two Vesperites back behind a crate stack.
Focus, Sully! You can do this!
Below them, on the main deck, Gage had managed to inject himself with a stimulant and a coagulant. He propped himself up against the container, his sidearm in hand, firing single shots at any target of opportunity. Even with a destroyed leg, he still fought. 10 minutes. The air grew thin, a pressure drop that made her lungs burn. The prisoners hammered on their cage's energy shields, their shouts filling the hangar.
Almost there. Almost there.
Sully muttered, her fingers a blur.
Got it!
She slammed her palm down on the main release panel. The energy fields around the cages hissed and dissolved. The prisoners were free. But the atmospheric purge continued, the alarms blaring their countdown. For a moment, the freed prisoners stood blinking. They cowered as plasma fire crisscrossed the bay above their heads, free, but still trapped. Then, a voice cut through the noise. A human woman, her Commonwealth Navy coveralls torn and filthy, but her bearing still rigid. A chief petty officer. Her gaze locked onto Teal, Pike, and Sully, then to the advancing Vesperites. The situation clicked into place.
They're killing us all anyway!
She bellowed.
Are we going to die in a cage or on our feet?
She grabbed a heavy metal strut from her pen's floor. She pointed it at the nearest Vesperite guard.
They're breathers!
The CPO yelled.
They need them to breathe! Knock the masks off!
A cheer went up. The Jordian freighter crewman let out a guttural roar and ripped a panel from a nearby conduit. The Karchers, fierce in their desperation, armed themselves with broken crate shards. They became a mob. They surged forward. Orso watched from the control room as the mob swarmed his squads. His training models accounted for soldiers, but overlooked 100 desperate captives swinging pipes and wrenches. The mob grabbed at the Vesperite's slender limbs, their sheer numbers overwhelming the guards' training and weaponry. They tore at the breathing masks. A Vesperite, its breather ripped away, flailed for a moment before collapsing, its respiratory system failing in the thinning atmosphere. He lost control. The mob forced the Vesperites to fall back, breaking their orderly lines. The path to the armored control room, perched on a gantry overlooking the chaos, was clear. Teal looked at Pike, her pulse frantic.
Let's go have a talk with the manager.
5 minutes to atmospheric evacuation. The control room door was a reinforced alloy slab. Pike grinned, a bloody smear on his teeth. Last magazine, Doc. Make it count. He leveled the plasma cannon and fired. The weapon's remaining power unleashed a single titanic blast. The door vaporized into a molten ruin. Teal and Pike stormed through the breach. Factor Orso stood waiting. 2 elite guards flanked him. The skin over their torsos rippled in calm, controlled patterns. Orso himself was still. 2 of his limbs anchored him to the deck. A third steadied his plasma weapon. Pike lunged forward, using the empty cannon as a club, smashing one Vesperite back into a console. The creature crumpled. The other lunged for Teal. She fired from the hip. Her shot hit its manipulator appendage, right where a primary nerve bundle would be in a human elbow. The limb went limp. The guard shrieked and staggered back. Orso fired. Teal dodged, the plasma bolt searing the air where her head was. She returned fire, her shot striking Orso in one of his floor-anchoring limbs. The limb buckled, and he collapsed, his weapon still trained on her. They faced each other, Teal, Pike, and a wounded Orso. The atmospheric alarm screamed its final warning. Your efforts are futile, Orso's translator buzzed. Suffocation is the logical conclusion. Teal looked at the alien commander, at his weapon's steady barrel. She could try to shoot him again, but he might take her with him, a trade she refused to make. She holstered her sidearm. The gesture was so unexpected that Pike stared at her. Orso's body canted forward, the sensitive membranes on his upper torso contracting. Teal unslung her medkit and opened it on the floor between them. Its contents lay organized, sterile.
I can set your limb and stop the bleeding,
she said.
I can save your life, or I can let you bleed out here in the dark. Your choice. Stop the atmospheric purge, and you get to live.
Orso remained motionless. He found the logic flawed. The human medic offered aid to an enemy combatant. A miscalculation.
I'm a medic,
Teal said.
My job is to keep people alive. That includes you, if you let me.
She gestured with her chin toward the viewport overlooking the hangar. Below, the riot faltered as the air thinned, bodies starting to collapse.
It includes them, too.
The skin along Orso's body rippled erratically. He looked from Teal's face to the open medkit to a secondary monitor displaying his own biosigns. A red line representing his blood pressure trended steadily downward. Another feed showed a scrolling, expired asset biosign list from the hangar floor. The count climbed. His plan to cut his losses resulted in a complete loss. Her illogical offer alone preserved him. Survival and mitigating loss was a better outcome than total expiration. With a soft clatter, Orso let his plasma weapon fall to the deck. He manipulated a control panel with his one good limb. Halt the purge, he commanded through his translator. The alarms stopped. A deep, shuddering hiss echoed through the hangar as emergency systems reversed, pumping air back into the bay. Orso looked at Teal, his body oriented toward her. State your terms, Corporal Medic. Teal's first order was to the Vesperite medical teams. She directed them via Orso's comm. Triage the wounded. Prisoners first, then her squad, then their own people. She personally attended to Orso. They worked in silence as she applied a sterilizing agent, set the hydrostatic pressures in his limb to splint the damaged cartilage, and sealed the wound with coagulant gel. She worked as she would on any patient, her movements quick and sure. He was her patient now, an enemy second. Pike helped carry a stabilized Gage into the control room. The old sergeant was weak, but he surveyed the scene. The disarmed Vesperites helping the wounded, the freed prisoners organizing themselves, and Teal giving orders to the enemy commander. He looked at Pike and gave a weak smile. "Told you she was command material." Teal walked to the main hangar control console. Sully was already there and tapped a sequence into the console. With Orso's surrender codes, they had complete access. Teal looked out the main viewport at the space battle, which still raged beyond the carrier's hull. She took a deep breath, the fresh air tasting sweet.
"Open the door, Sully."
Hangar 4's massive outer doors slid open, revealing the void and the war that still filled it. A Commonwealth frigate, the Stalwart, broke from the fighting, its running lights blinking. Its captain surely expected to find a blasted-out crater. Instead, he found a fully lit hangar, an open invitation. As the frigate drew closer, its sensors would register the anomaly. A functioning field hospital and a surrendered enemy force occupying a beachhead they had just created. A different kind of rescue was on its way. Commonwealth Fleet Command met the report with 10 full seconds of static before the Fleet Admiral crackled over the comm.
"Repeat your report, Corporal."
Teal stood on the gantry overlooking the now secured hangar. She gave her account again. She secured the Vesper Guild carrier, the Ledger, its commanding factor, and hundreds of freed prisoners from a dozen different species by trading medical aid for a ceasefire. Capturing a carrier and its senior officer intact was a strategic coup. It gave the Commonwealth immense leverage, a powerful bargaining chip to negotiate the return of their own personnel captured in other engagements. It proved they could seize the Guild's assets whole. She looked down at the scene below. Medics from both sides moved through a landscape of makeshift triage stations, their different uniforms a trivial distinction. Former prisoners helped, carrying supplies, comforting the wounded. She won by saving lives. Gage, a proper medical brace now supporting his shattered leg, limped over to join her. He leaned against the railing, following her stare. "My Scrap 9 plan ended with kicking the door down," he admitted. "I only focused on the breach." He turned to look at her, and his exhaustion gave way to a smile. "You, Teal. You figured out what to do after." The battle for Rime Verge still raged outside, but here, in the hangar, a human medic and a Vesperite orderly worked together to set a Karcher's broken leg. Teal was a soldier. She was a healer.